for the opportunity to address this important subject of September 11 and also establish the links between the so-called war on terrorism and the issues underlying the process of globalization. We are not dealing with separate realities. We are dealing with the interface between war and the conquest of economic frontiers through the application of these deadly IMF World Bank reforms which have characterized the international scene for the last 20 years and which have led to economic and social devastation throughout the developing countries, but also in most of the developed countries where similar reforms under the auspices of national governments and financial markets have also been applied. So we must understand war and globalization are intricately related, and war is the structural adjustment of last resort. It destroys and it destroys institutions, it kills people, and ultimately it is an instrument of economic conquest. We must understand the events of September 11. The war on terrorism is a fabrication from A to Z. We have piles of documents which prove unequivocally that this is not a war on terrorism, but it is a war of conquest, which is marked by the extension of America's sphere of influence into Central Asia. This war has been long in the making, in the planning stages. September 11 is a pretext for waging war on the grounds that one has to go after Osama bin Laden. Now, we have to also understand that in the wake of 9/11, we are perhaps facing the most serious crisis in modern history. It is not only marked by the collapse of living standards all over the world, which are the consequence precisely of the neoliberal reforms applied universally and which have impoverished millions of people. And this poverty is not the result of any scarcity of resources, quite the opposite. The system has unlimited capacity to produce, yet the very process of its expansion worldwide leads to essentially impoverishing people by minimizing employment and by minimizing wages and so on. And the war on terrorism is in fact the counterpart of this process. It supports the process of globalization. It destroys national sovereignties, and it extends the American empire into new frontiers. Let me say a few words. This is well documented that Osama bin Laden is a creation of the CIA. In fact, nobody actually denies that. What they say is Osama is a creation of the CIA and he went against us. Now, believe it or not, he went against us. We helped this guy back in the early 80s. We helped him. We brought the Mujahideen. We set up the madrasas. We had the training camps. We put in place the Pakistan Inter-Services Intelligence, which was there to help Osama, and so on and so forth. All this is documented in many, many books and articles. But the question which I'd like to address now, the CIA says Osama went against us. This is a blowback. They call it a blowback. In technical intelligence jargon, it means that an intelligence asset goes against the sponsors. Okay, that's a blowback. We helped Osama, and he's now turned against Uncle Sam. Well, I can tell you that that is simply not true. And I will present the evidence to you that Osama bin Laden is still an intelligence asset of the US government. his al-Qaeda has collaborated with successive U.S. administrations, including Bush, Clinton and Bush Jr. And you might be interested to know that in July, 2 months before September 11, Osama bin Laden was hospitalized in this beautiful American hospital in Dubai. Now, and he was receiving treatment for his kidney problems, which he had caught while sitting in damp caves in Afghanistan. Okay, but in any event, this is based on a report published in the French daily Le Figaro, which is one of France's largest newspapers. During his 15-day stay in the hospital, he was visited by the CIA head of station in the United Arab Emirates, and there was no attempt made to either arrest him or deport him. He was given treatment in a hospital which was connected or tied to the U.S. Embassy in the United Arab Emirates. If you go to the embassy's homepage, you'll find the telephone number of the hospital where Osama was treated. And incidentally, so here is, this is the CIA, visiting Osama on his hospital bed while he's recovering from his kidney problems. And incidentally, on the 10th of September, Osama bin Laden was back in hospital in Rawalpindi, in a military hospital in Rawalpindi. Anybody who has been to Rawalpindi knows that the place, it's the headquarters of the Pakistani military. It's swarming with U.S. military advisors, that the U.S. military mission is close by. It is impossible that Osama bin Laden could have been hospitalized on the 10th of September. I don't know when he was released. The report doesn't say. But everybody knew in the high ranks of the Pakistani military and the U.S. military that he was in hospital in Rawalpindi. And the source of this information, which has not been refuted, I love mainstream sources. Dan Rather, CBS News. Now, Dan Rather, CBS News, goes to Rawalpindi and interviews a number of people about this, and then it's broadcast. Of course, everybody says it's not relevant. Of course it's relevant. Of course. In other words, we have to connect the dots. If in fact he was hospitalized in Dubai and hospitalized again in Rawalpindi, and he has a kidney problem, and he was never arrested, and if Donald Rumsfeld says we will have to use nuclear weapons to go after him, obviously there's somebody is lying somewhere, right? Because and I have the quotes from Donald Rumsfeld saying that they will use nuclear weapons against Osama. Now, we had, if in effect they had been interested at all in arresting him, they would have done it, but they didn't. And the fact of the matter is that al-Qaeda network, which was created by the CIA in '79 and which gained prominence throughout the '80s, alongside the development of Pakistan's military intelligence apparatus, which was also supported by the CIA, all this was a process which was supposed to be against the Soviet Union at the time, to have the Mujahideen fight on behalf of Uncle Sam. Of course, they didn't necessarily know they were fighting on behalf of Uncle Sam, because intelligence assets act wittingly or unwittingly in relation to their sponsors. That's the nature of an intelligence operation. But bear in mind that in the wake of the Cold War, none of this infrastructure was disbanded. Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda continued, the links with Pakistan's inter-services intelligence continued, and the links to the U.S., to agencies of the U.S. government continued as well. And I will give you documentary evidence of that statement. Here you have essentially essentially what you have is the following. The ISI historically is the institutional base for channeling support to Islamic insurgencies in different parts of the world, but particularly in the former Soviet Union, the Balkans, the Middle East, but also in other regions. Pakistan's inter-services intelligence is a vast bureaucratic military apparatus which was set up with the support of the CIA in the early 80s under the government, the so-called, I was saying so-called democratic. It was set up under the government of General Zia-ul-Haq in the early 80s. It developed into a vast network of agents, but also it had a military component, and it supported both the Osama bin Laden, but also the Taliban. And bear in mind, the Taliban were supported by the United States. They were always supported by the United States. They would never have been able to form a government in 1996 had it not been for the support of Pakistan's inter-services intelligence and the Pakistan military, as well as military aid, which was channeled using Pakistan's ISI as a go-between to the Taliban and to Osama. In summer of 2001, the ISI Chief General Mahmoud Atta transferred $100,000 to the ringleader of 9/11. Now understand that the ISI has also very close links with the CIA. This information is confirmed by a number of reports, including an FBI report, which points to the transfer of money but doesn't identify the name of the individual who is behind the transfer. But it's confirmed by Agence France Presse and the Times of India and an Indian intelligence report that it was the ISI which transferred this money to the ringleader of 9/11. Now, curiously, and incidentally, the FBI report, which was quoted by an ABC News story in late September, talks about the money man behind the terrorists. The money man, the architect, I'm using their terms, the money man, the architect behind 9/11. Now, the money man behind 9/11 is Mahmoud Ahmad, head of the ISI, not necessarily as an individual, but as the chief of an organization which is closely in liaison with the CIA. Now, these reports are unequivocal because they're based, again, on FBI. The FBI says, very textually, you can read it in our magazine, because we've reproduced these quotes, that they can trace the money trail. They know who is behind it. And in fact, subsequent reports say it's Mahmoud Ahmad. Now, Mahmoud Ahmad arrives in the United States on the 4th of September. Now, is this event related or unrelated to 9/11? I think it is. He arrives on the 4th, and the press briefings say General Mahmoud is here on a routine visit of consultations with his U.S. counterparts. Now, who are his U.S. counterparts? George Tenet of the CIA, Richard Armitage in the State Department, Mark Grossman, and so on and so forth. I mean, these are his counterparts. He has top-level meetings with these individuals in the course of his week-long consultation. But more importantly, in the wake of 9/11, he also meets up with, U.S. officials to discuss the cooperation of Pakistan in in the war on terrorism. So that what you have here essentially is the money man behind 9/11, according to FBI reports, on an official visit, given red carpet treatment in Washington, with meetings at the State Department, at the White House, at the Pentagon, and the CIA, and in the wake of 9/11, Mahmoud Ahmad comes on the 4th. He has meetings with his US counterparts. On the 11th of September, there are several meetings of the National Security Council, which the first one takes place actually by video telephone from Offutt Air Force Base, where President Bush had been taken. The other members of the National Security Council are in Washington. And at that meeting, George Tenet essentially feeds the assumptions to President Bush that Osama bin Laden is behind the war, behind the attacks, and Bush gives the green light to wage the war on terrorism. And then the final meeting is at 11 o'clock at night. It's the meeting of the War Cabinet, where they essentially decide on, they agree on their strategy. What happens the following morning? They said, we're going to go after the terrorists, we're going to deploy all this military might. It was all decided in the evening of September 11th. On September 12th in the morning, Richard Armitage, perhaps one of the most powerful members of the Bush administration, together with George Tenet and a couple of other people, Richard Armitage meets with Mahmoud Ahmad, the money man, the architect behind the 9/11 terrorists. And what is the subject matter of their meetings? Cooperation of the ISI in waging the war on terrorism. Doesn't that sound a little bit contradictory that the money man behind 9/11, and I'm quoting the FBI, would be invited to help the US administration in going after Osama? Of course, Osama is an intelligence asset of the US government, and so the whole issue, of course, is all the inconsistencies, I think, start to emerge. But there you are. The US government signs and has an agreement which is then finalized a day later on the 13th, and General Mahmoud Ahmad states that they will cooperate in helping the US administration in going after Osama bin Laden. It's a little bit like asking the devil to go after Dracula, okay? Because in fact, the terrorists in the 9/11, the terrorists were instruments, and they were instruments of a well-prepared intelligence operation which emanates out of Pakistan's inter-services intelligence. Now, if then the Bush administration asks Pakistan's inter-services intelligence to collaborate in the war on terrorism, when in fact the money man behind these terrorist attacks emanates from Pakistan's ISI, then I think we can safely infer, if we're looking at the proximity group of this individual. I mean, in my faculty of social sciences, I deal with sociologists and anthropologists who like to look at proximity groups. And if they looked at the proximity group of this individual, say, he's a buddy of Mohammed Atta, but he's also a buddy of Richard Armitage, and he has a very close personal relationship with George Tenet. Okay? A very close personal relationship with George Tenet. And George Tenet has a very close personal relationship with the President of the United States. And that is fundamental in understanding how the military intelligence apparatus has in effect taken over the reins of government in the United States. The people who pull the strings, who are behind him, are the key individuals of the military intelligence apparatus, and behind those individuals, presumably, you have other brokers which belong to the financial corporate establishment, which are also the oil companies, the banks, and so on, which certainly have links to the CIA. So this is the situation that we are in today. From my point of view, the foreknowledge is a red herring. The foreknowledge issue is a red herring because obviously they knew. They keep track of their intelligence assets. If Osama bin Laden is an intelligence asset to this day, and the evidence proves it beyond doubt, then obviously the US government knows everything about Osama bin Laden, and it also points, although I don't want to necessarily draw, this is still a very complex process, but it does point at least to cover up, complicity and deception. Complicity of senior officials of the Bush administration, the fact that Richard Armitage meets up with the money man behind the terrorists, and so on. I think at least that should be investigated. That ultimately this is the only way to prevent what has been announced, which is a major military adventure which threatens the future of humanity. Thank you very much.